Hi everyone, Anders Ibsen from Windermere Professional Partners, managing broker of Anders Ibsen Homes. We're here to talk about appraisals today and what you can do to protect yourself against low appraisal situations. Appraisals are one of those things where everyone talks about them, but very few people have the intimate knowledge to really discuss the details and how to come out ahead. So that's what we're going to explore. Now, we're all familiar with today's hot market conditions. It's a seller's market. And usually when people think of challenges in today's real estate market, they're usually thinking of what buyers have to go through, namely getting your offer accepted at all. But there's a problem that really haunts both buyers and sellers at many stages of the transaction, and that is what to do about appraisals. Because when an appraisal comes in that's low, when you're in a bidding war situation, when a buyer competes with other buyers to get their offer accepted, they drive the price up to win a bidding war, and that appraiser shows up and sees that house. If they don't have closed sales that can support what might be a new price point, you run into a low appraisal situation. And that can be challenging because that means someone has to give something up at that point. Seller either has to drop the price, buyer has to dig deep into their pocket to come up with extra cash, both have to meet in the middle somewhere, or the deal just tanks. And no one likes low appraisals for that situation. Now, increasingly, buyers are trying to account for that by including what's called a Form 22AD in their offers. What that means is that the buyer acknowledges that it might be a new price point, and the buyer says, "Seller, I acknowledge that, but I'm bringing extra cash, and I'm promising there might be some extra cash in the future to make up for that low appraised value if that comes in, so we can still close at the agreed upon price." And that does work, but it also comes with its risks. The biggest risk being that what if it's not enough? And so if you run into that situation where the buyer's extra promised cash plus the appraised value is not the purchase price, at that point it's a really lose-lose situation, because either the seller has to accept a lower purchase price or they have the right to terminate the agreement and put the home back on the market. Not very fun for the seller, and even if it does end up working out, the buyer still has to come up with thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars extra out of pocket. So in general, low appraisals are not a lot of fun. So how do we get ahead of that? Well, the thing is, appraisals are not the weather. They're not just a third-party incident that just happens to you and you just have to roll the dice. An appraisal is something you definitely can have influence in, and in my direct experience, both as a broker and as a licensed appraiser, a low appraisal situation in almost all cases is entirely preventable with strategic planning. And that's what we're going to talk about. So before we do that and we talk strategy, let's take a step back and just explore what an appraisal is even for. Why do we even have them? So a common misperception is that an appraisal is there to determine market value, and that's really not true. The definition of market value that Fannie Mae has is essentially just what a typical buyer and a typical seller, under normal conditions, equally informed, not acting under duress, all that boilerplate stuff, what they agree to. So unless one of them is under duress or really differently motivated, that contract price is usually a good sign of what is typical. The reason why we have appraisals, or rather why your lender has an appraisal, is to determine the risk of the loan. That's why we have appraisals. The reason is your average 30-year fixed mortgage is an investment product. So your lender gives you that mortgage, you close on the house. Then once you close, about a week later, you probably get something in the mail that says, "Hey, we're selling your mortgage to so-and-so, Fannie Mae or a big bank or something." And that's what's called the secondary mortgage market. It's basically where investors buy bonds that are big securitized pools of all these mortgages from all over the place. And in order for your mortgage broker to be able to do that, they have to meet certain criteria that an appraisal establishes. That's our lending system. That's why 30-year fixed mortgages are so accessible and have historically low interest rates. It's because of these rules set up. And so the appraiser's job is really to help the lender make sure that they're not over-lending on their collateral, which is your house, on their loan. And worst case, if you default on your mortgage and the bank has to repossess your house, they'll know that they can at least recoup the cost of that initial investment because it's been appraised for a certain dollar amount. So really, if you think about it, an appraiser is almost like a food inspector, except instead of food, it's mortgages. So that's why appraisals are a thing. It's not to determine market value, it's to determine risk for lending institutions and investors. So that really determines our strategy, because we have to think in terms of what the appraiser needs to be successful. So an appraiser is not an advocate. An appraiser is an independent, objective professional, And they're not just going to look at your comps. You can't just pull a bunch of closed sales in the area out of a hat and hand it to them and hope for the best. That's what some listing agents do, if they do anything at all. But you have to think in terms of what an appraiser needs to be successful. And before we get to comps, let's talk even further on the front end about more things that you can do, and that is offer strategy. So you're a listing agent, or you're a seller working with a listing agent, and let's say you have 5 offers on your house. Vet them. Don't just go for the highest price one necessarily. Look at who has a really good lender, a good local mortgage broker with a solid appraisal and underwriting team who can actually close the deal, not just some garbage online discount broker who may or may not even call your team back, right? So the choice of the lender and the who is a very important factor. And then, of course, if someone is escalating their price to a new price point that might be new from the market, which your agent should know that if you have a good pricing strategy, and account for that risk. Check to see who is bringing extra cash to account for a low appraisal, and if not, just be prepared for that risk. And if they're promising vast sums of extra cash to meet that difference, you have the right to demand what's called evidence of funds. You can actually ask them to prove, either on the front end or a couple of days after you accept the offer, for a bank statement or some equivalent to prove that they have those assets. So just on the front end, be discerning about who is even offering on your house, and that right there is insurance to prevent these situations from spiraling out of control. But getting back to what appraisers are looking for, that's the other factor. So you've accepted a strong offer, maybe you put another good offer in backup status just to be safe. Now it's time to actually engage with the appraiser. So generally speaking, you'll want to provide something that's helpful to the appraiser that meets their standards. So what does that mean? So generally, appraisers are going to meet lender criteria, or they have to meet certain lender criteria for the comps they're putting in the report. So usually appraisers want the most recent closed sales that they possibly can. The ideal is within 90 days of the day that they inspected the property. That's a really good recent sale. If it's in an urban area, like here in Tacoma, usually they're going to be really reluctant to look outside of a 1 mile radius around the house. So there has to be a really good reason for a faraway house that might be in a different neighborhood. And they also have to do what's called bracketing. Bracketing means that they have to account for the higher and lower end of certain attributes for the house. So that means if your house is 2,000 square feet in size, for example, maybe they might want to include a sale that's maybe 1,500 square feet or another that's 2,200 square feet, and they just kind of balance out both ends of that attribute, or bath count, or room count, or lot size, et cetera. So the lender is really asking the agent to do that. So that's why just handing a list of sales and just kind of passing it off doesn't really work necessarily, because the appraiser is still going to have to work hard if your list doesn't pass the lender's muster. Because if the appraiser is lazy, then that underwriter is going to force them at best to revise the report. And at worst, if it's really bad appraising, then they could have disciplinary action taken against their license. So you have to think of what their obligations are. But besides just those hard criteria that lenders and underwriters are looking for in an appraisal report, it's also just common sense. Appraisers use a principle called the Principle of Substitution when they're trying to comp out a property to figure out the value situation. And that is basically, what else would that buyer be looking for? So that buyer who is under contract with you right now, who is offered on your house, if they're offering on your house, if they're under contract, what other homes would they consider offering on besides yours? In other words, what houses are competing with your house? If they are, then it's a comp. If not, then just don't include it. So once you have that data compiled, the best way to engage with the appraiser is make a thoughtful presentation, make it convenient, treat them like a client, basically, just with good customer service, send them that data, and then just get out of their way. Let the professional do their job. If you do have to physically let the appraiser in, then do the same thing, but then don't hover, don't follow them around. Just let the person do their job and just respect the person doing that, and clean up your backyard. When I was working full-time as an appraiser, I experienced many a backyard full of landmines. So if you have a dog, every appraiser would really appreciate you cleaning up the landmines. So that's how we handle the comparable sale portion. But it's more than just that. An appraiser in their report doesn't just list comps in a sales grid. What they're also going to do is evaluate the market. So what you can really do to help your cause is you can provide helpful market data on things like the supply and demand situation, what is the trend of where sale prices are going, things like that. So if you are in, say, a bidding war situation where you're a seller and you've accepted a great offer, but that price is just new for the neighborhood, comparable sales might be scarce, or you might have to be creative with the kind of comparables that you provide and explain why they're comparable. If you have market statistics that prove that, for example, sale prices tend to go higher than list prices, which means bidding wars are common, time on market is low, supply of available homes is short, or historically there's a rising trend of sale prices, then those can be absolutely helpful things to include along with your comps to help that appraiser make the case in the report. So there's just a few examples there. So that's after you've engaged with the appraiser, and generally speaking, if you do all those things, I'd say 90% of low appraisal situations just aren't a thing, and you have a successful closing just by engaging on the front end and doing so respectfully and giving them distance. But sometimes you do have low appraisals even after that. So what happens then? Well, the first thing you have to ask is that low appraisal accurate? Maybe an overly motivated buyer did offer a little bit higher, and then you just have to account for that risk factor on the front end, and you just have to work with someone who has that knowledge about whether or not something is a new price, and you just have to roll the dice or have contingency plans for that. But at the same time, appraisers are also human, and humans are not infallible in their judgment. Something that happens a lot in today's marketplace, because appraisers are actually in pretty high demand, there's actually an appraiser shortage right now. And so because lenders are often so short-staffed to get appraisers out there to inspect properties, oftentimes what happens is they have to call in people from faraway neighborhoods. So you might have a Tacoma appraiser, or rather a Tacoma appraisal on a property here, but there's no available appraiser in the area in the time frame that's needed, so they might call in someone from Bainbridge Island or Chehalis or something like that, and they might do the appraisal. And oftentimes, these outsider appraisers, sometimes they do a great job, other times they're just not familiar with the market trends here, the prices, and that influences which properties they might even look at or how they analyze them. I would say in my experience, the bulk of inaccurate low appraisals that I've seen where the numbers just did not make sense, where there was good data out there and they just did not use it, I would say the majority of those were people who were not from the area they were appraising in, and they just did not have the geographic competency to do the good job, and that's something they have to account for. So if you're in those situations where you're not just appealing based on use this comp, because you should have supplied that on the front end anyway, what you're really looking for if you're contesting an appraisal that you believe is inaccurate is you're looking for, simply put, mistakes. You're looking for inaccuracies and inconsistencies, not just with the comps, you should have used this property, why did you use this one? But you're also looking for inconsistencies. So for example, a great place to look is the sales grid. That's where all the comps are in the report. Look at the adjustments that are made. So for example, let's say that the subject property has been extensively remodeled to the studs, brand new kitchen, brand new bathrooms, just new plumbing and everything. Maybe the appraiser included a sale there that has more dated condition and they didn't adjust for the condition. That would be an example of something that you can look at or have your professional look at. You're just looking for those kind of inconsistencies if you believe that it's not the most credible appraisal. And sometimes, frankly, it's just stupid stuff. On more than one occasion, I kid you not, I've actually seen an appraisal report that came in low and the appraiser got the wrong contract price in the report. So be discerning and just make sure that everything is accurate there and you'll be okay. So one other thing I will address on the appraisal front, which I think really needs to be talked about, is VA appraisals. My team works with lots of VA buyers. We love them. And it's actually a very underrated mortgage product. I think VA often gets a bad rap because there's this perception that VA appraisals are just innately harder than conventional mortgages or even FHA type of loans. And while it's true that VA appraisals do have higher property condition standards compared to conventional loans, for example, just like FHA, really the principles are exactly the same. You're not evaluating the property any differently. And in some ways, I would actually go further. I would say in one key respect, VA appraisals are actually easier than any other kind of mortgage product. And the reason is there's a little thing called Tidewater. Tidewater is the actual technical term for a process that a VA appraiser is going to go through when they're doing the report, they're working on it, and they can't quite justify the purchase price. They're looking at the data, they've inspected the house, but they just can't make it work. So rather than surprising both parties with a low appraisal opinion, which would happen with any other kind of loan, by regulation, that VA appraiser actually has to contact everyone and say, hey, look, I'm having problems. Is there any data you have? Are there new closed sales? Is there something new that's going on, or just something that was not considered that you can send my way, and then I might include it? And I've reversed Tidewater before on the buying side. And on the selling side, I just haven't had low appraisals because I've controlled that process. But Tidewater is a real thing, and you can, if not reverse the low appraisal and save your buyer some money, or save your seller definitely some money, you can at least mitigate some of the damage. And that's the only kind of loan where you can do that. You get a giant mulligan. It's a great loan product. So ultimately, those are just a few things to consider. I've given you a lot of technical information, and there's a lot to process. But at the same time, wouldn't you rather work with someone who's over-prepared and gives you a closing that is uneventful, so you can just move on to the next stage of your life with dignity and grace and not having to worry about something like a low appraisal sabotaging things, versus having no plan and things coming apart at the last minute? At the end of the day, you're going to be best served if you work with someone who has the local knowledge, understands how the process works, and has the initiative to put out fires before you even know about them. I'm always happy to take your questions about this topic or anything else. This is Anders Ibsen with Windermere Professional Partners, managing broker of Anders Ibsen Homes. Please keep the questions coming. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much.